Well, all eyes are on Australia to see if we can resist the Chinese Communist Party's bullying and power. We've been the leading model, I guess, for other nations concerned over China's influence, and that's come at a hefty price because we have been exposing their control and their secrecy and their potential to influence our own domestic affairs. But the latest controversy of a search warrant was a search warrant that was carried out on Liberal MP Gladys Liu for her potential ties to an accused China spy, and that sparked questions over Australia's security. As I said last night, we've invited Ms Liu to join us on the program, but we haven't heard back from her people. But for more on this, I'm joined by former head of China analyst Paul Monk. Paul, thanks so much for your time tonight. How seriously should we be concerned about this latest search warrant naming not only a political party but a particular MP?
Well, I think we need to put it in the perspective that for some time now our security intelligence people have been openly saying that we face higher levels of espionage by Russian and Chinese operatives in this country than we did even during the Cold War. And of the two, it's very clear that while the Russians get up to various kinds of mischief, the Chinese have a large strategic agenda. And we can see through the trade sanctions levelled on us over the past 12 months that that agenda is about not simply some subtle inflection of our policies here and there, but coercive domination of the way we operate in the world. So this is a major challenge. And I would say that the search warrant issue and the questions about Gladys Liu and her contacts are a small part of that big picture. And as government sources have remarked, as the AFP also have remarked, that's a subject that's still under investigation. And so it's a little improper to say too much about it right now.
Yes, of course, we don't want to, just because there are reports in media, you can't correlate one person's misdeeds with others, and political figures all come into contact with a variety of individuals. I want to make that very, very clear. But there does seem to be a pattern of significant Chinese figures trying to influence political parties, political organisations, or carry favour with individual politicians that then are later on exposed or described as being persons of interest to Asia or deported or agents of the communist state. It does desperately concern Australians because it's becoming, I guess, more publicly known. How widespread do you really think this is?
I think we need to, in a sense, turn this around, Cory. The real work that Chinese consulates in this country, the Chinese embassy in this country, the Chinese United Front Works Department based in China itself, have been engaged in for many years now, is not simply getting ethnic Chinese into positions of influence in Australia. It's winning, to their point of view, leading Australians. And they've had remarkable success in doing that. This is not Chinese Australians, pardon me, this is household names. That's the big problem. Much of our Chinese community came here from the PRC, or for that matter elsewhere in Asia, because they wanted what this country had to offer. What the Communist Party has been doing is not so much using any significant proportion of that community for its nefarious purposes, but rather seeking to intimidate it, to infiltrate it, to take over its independent media. And that's something we want to protect the Chinese community in Australia from. So I don't think that our concern ought to be Chinese Australians as such. And we should add that at the margin, insofar as we now have a significant Chinese community, many people of Chinese ethnic background will, independently of the question of the Communist Party, hold considerable affection for and pride in their country, which is, after all, a great country that has achieved a great deal over the last 30, 40 years. So we have a delicate line to tread here, but I would emphasise that the people who are exerting the most dubious influence at the moment on this country's foreign relations with regard to China are well-known public identities who are not Chinese.
Paul, that's an excellent point, and I've been in battle with some of them through this station and through my time in Parliament as well, because it seems as if they are proselytising for the Chinese government because there's a weight of dollars that are flowing their way. They're either heading up an institution or they've got a business that is largely dependent on it. But isn't it the case that if we as a nation are dependent to such an extent for our financial success or our economic success on a country like China, which is centrally controlled, that can turn off the tap whenever it likes, it makes us extraordinarily vulnerable. And shouldn't that be our number one priority for politicians and business figures alike? How can we make Australia safe and secure, not just from a defence point of view, but economically as well?
Yes, well, I would say that the big lesson, the unmistakable takeaway lesson from the last 12 months is that's been driven home to us. For the longest time, we were told by these people, business people who were, let's be frank, making money in China, and good luck to them, or by former politicians who were cozying up to the Chinese in one manner or another, that in fact, precisely because we were doing so well in the two-way trade and because China's economy was growing, there was everything for China to gain by having a for Australia to gain, from having a constructive relationship with China. If in fact the Chinese government was prepared simply to work at that level of pragmatic bargains and win-win trade, as successive Australian governments have urged it to do and hoped it would do, then that would be a sound argument. What we've discovered is that the Communist Party in particular is an organisation that ruthlessly and unscrupulously will use what power it has to gain its ends. These trade sanctions are not done in good faith. They have nothing to do with infestations in timber or problems with our crops. They have to do with an attempt to coerce us to Beijing's preferred position. And if we were to give ground in an effort to mollify their petulance, they would simply push harder. They are wanting to get us under their thumb. So we have to now take a long, hard look at this situation in a way we've avoided doing for many years. And it's just begun.
Yeah, one of the challenges, of course, is not just what happens here, but what's going to happen in China. It's effectively a dictatorship. There's a lifetime president. And you made the point that there's been some remarkable changes there over the last 30 or 40 years. They need those changes to continue to happen. And they need Western consumption. They need Western products. They need, the Five Eyes nations, effectively, the Anglosphere, to be continuing to do business with China. How vulnerable is the Chinese economy to a concerted effort by those Five Eyes nations to perhaps, I won't say cripple it, but to exert an economic impact so much so that it might prompt some changes domestically there?
It's no longer a matter simply of Five Eyes, by which, if your listeners are unaware of it, of course, you mean the English-speaking countries and their strategic intelligence alliance. Rather, it is a matter of the Indo-Pacific, because Xi Jinping has contrived to alienate almost all his neighbours simultaneously. You know, from India via Australia, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea. He's niggled, he's bullied, he's threatened. Of course, he's cracked down in Hong Kong, which has appalled many people. He's threatened to use violence against Taiwan, not simply if it declares independence, but if it refuses to come to heel on China's terms. This is a man who is riding for a fall, quite frankly. What is going to happen, very predictably, is that these various countries will be increasingly talking to one another about how to constrain the ambitions of this Chinese state. And let me say, when in the 1960s Nikita Khrushchev was boss cocky in the Soviet Union, he did a number of reckless things that the more conservative, old-style Stalinists around him were very nervous about, and that's why in the end they dumped him. He was pushed out and replaced by Brezhnev, and Brezhnev superficially looked less liberal than Khrushchev, but in fact he was simply more conservative. The Communist Party has a reckoning coming, and you can be quite sure that within the party there are numerous people uncomfortable with much that Xi Jinping is doing and where it could lead. We need to be right on top of that game, we and our allies in the Indo-Pacific.
Paul Monk, your analysis is just fantastic and very incisive. So thank you for sharing it with us tonight. I look forward to talking with you about this again sometime soon.
Thanks, Cory.